Hey, what's up YouTube? Back again for another video, and this time we are talking about shooting in 720p. For those of you keeping score, the year is 2021, and most of us in this day and age have 4K shooters when it comes to the camera we use on YouTube. 4K I wouldn't say is the standard right now. I still would give that to 1080p, but only for the next year or so. You can get cameras like this Canon M50 or the Lumix Panasonic G7. You can get cameras like that for $500 and less. The question I'm asking today is 720p still viable in this post 4K world? Well, let's talk about it. Okay, so the two cameras we're going to be looking at today, of course, again, first one up on the list is the Canon Rebel T5i. This is actually my T6i. I got rid of the T5i a while ago, but this is going to stand in for it. Like the T5i, it also only shoots 60 frames a second in 720p. That being said, all of the Rebel footage that I'll be showing in this video came from my T5i. And next is the Canon M50. Now this can shoot 60 frames in full HD. However, I was excited to find out that this camera was a 120p shooter, but then that excitement got deflated a little bit when I found that the 720p was only in or that the 120p was only in 720. So I've got clips in 120 frames a second in 720p. We'll look at both of them, and we'll answer the question, is it still viable? And I'll give you some tips on how I shoot 720p to maybe help you shoot better 720p. So without further ado, let's run some of those clips. Okay, so you saw a little footage there of the T5i in 60 frames a second, as well as the Canon M50 in 120 frames a second. So let's get on to some of those tips. First tip when it comes to shooting in 720p for me is I gotta make sure that I have a lot of light. Okay, so when you're shooting with these cameras, especially in 720p, you get some issues with the low resolution, like some aliasing, some moire, some things that are going on like that. And especially when it comes to the shadows, there is tons of noise in the shadows. So for me, I generally make sure that I'm shooting outside. Once I was shooting outside, then I figured that pretty much made most of my issues when it came to light go away. This has issues with dynamic range as it is, being Canon cameras, but it's worse when you're shooting in 720p. So I usually shoot outside, and if I'm shooting outside in the shade, I shoot against the shaded background to help with that and to help with all the grain and the noise. And I find that that usually does the trick. So even in a studio setting like this, you got to make sure you're having a lot of light when you shoot. And again, if you're gonna use the light, kind of shoot up against the lit background. Don't have a bunch of shadows and darkness in the background, because you will definitely notice that noise and that grain. So tip number one, make sure you have a lot of light. Tip number two when it comes to shooting in 720p is try to use the sharpest lens that you can find. The kit lens on both of these cameras are actually pretty decent. That being said, you can get some pretty sharp glass for pretty cheap when it comes to these cameras. And for me, the two suggestions, the M50 footage, I always use a speed booster with the M50 because the reasons are twofold. For one, it's going to help me with that low light issue, as it gives me an extra stop of light. It's going to get me closer to a full frame look. And with the speed booster, I can adapt my good old EF lenses with it. And with I'm shooting with the M50, I'm going to use that Canon Nifty 50. Now, this is a tried and true lens that's been around for years and years. The Canon M50 1.8 is it's a very sharp lens for the price. You can get one of these used for $100 or even a little less than that. And I think that's definitely worth the price for what you're getting. When it comes to my T5i, I would also use the Canon M50, but since I don't have any kind of speed booster option with it, I noticed that the shot was very tight, and so I started using the lens that's on here right now. This is the Pancake, the 24mm 2.8, and At 2.8, it's still actually a very sharp lens, definitely much sharper than what I was getting with the kit lens, and I got some really nice shots shooting on my T5i with this camera. So those are the lenses I'm using. Again, the kit lens is fine, but as soon as you can afford it, again, this is also a $100 lens, so $100 a piece for each lens, and you're good to go. So tip number 2, definitely use a sharp lens. Okay, so tip number 3 when it comes to shooting in 720p, make sure you have that focus nailed down. In the M50, when you're shooting in 720p, 120 frames a second, you don't have autofocus. So it's important that you make sure you have your focus locked in. Luckily, with the M50, you get some assist features like focus peaking that'll help you make sure you get that nailed in. But I usually use the zoom function and 2x zoom, and then I'll rack focus that way. And once I see the focus peaking there, then I know I'm good to go. Shooting on this, same thing with the T5i and T6i. Now, you actually do keep your autofocus when it comes to shooting at 60 frames a second. That being said, the T5i nor 6i has dual pixel autofocus. The autofocus systems in these cameras are decent, but you'll see a little bit of hunting sometimes when you're, especially when you're tracking a moving subject in 60 frames a second. So in that case, I usually, same thing, I'll do the 2x focus and then just kind of rack my focus from there. So again, when it comes to shooting 720p, I shoot in manual focus just to make sure that I got that focus dialed in. Okay, so final thoughts. Can you shoot 720p? Yes, you can absolutely shoot 720p. I hear a lot of the YouTubers say that, oh, you know, you gotta shoot 1080p minimum and 720p is not viable anymore and da 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 da. That may be true in some respects, but I think for me, I shot 720p slow-mo all the time in my T5i simply because it was all that was available to me. I wanted to learn how to shoot slow-mo, but I didn't want to wait till I got a 1080p or 4K slow-mo shooter to start learning how to shoot slow-mo B-roll. Like I said, just work with what you got. I shot tons of slow-mo B-roll with the T5i, and it got better as time went on. And again, it wasn't because I was shooting at a newer resolution, it was just the knowledge that I got from trial and error. So if 720p is all you got, definitely use 720p. In regards to YouTube, again, it's gonna look fine. Most of you are watching this on the cell phone, and the footage probably looked okay. When it comes to client work, you can get by with 720p if you're doing some pro bono work for a low budget client. If you're shooting the clients like music video, or if you're shooting like a small commercial for the ice cream stand down the street or something like that, you can definitely get away with 720p when it comes to doing client work like that. Of course, if you're getting paid more, you're doing weddings, shooting weddings and like corporate work, if you're doing like real estate, things like that, you're definitely going to want to shoot the 1080p or 4K if you have it available. And before we wrap up, I got one more bonus tip with you. So here's the bonus tip. When you're shooting in 720p, when it's all said and done, make sure you export in 4K. And what I mean by that is, in most of our editing software, it'll give us the option at the end when we're ready to export our video. Do we want to export it in 1080p or do we want to export it in 4K? And you always want to export it in 4K, especially when it comes to YouTube, because YouTube videos, all of them, first of all YouTube videos go through compression. So all YouTube videos, when they get uploaded to YouTube, they're going to lose some quality. They're not going to look as sharp as they do on your computer screen or even on your camera's LCD. So with that being said, YouTube will compress 4K footage less than it does 1080p. That is to say that you get more megabits and a higher bit rate allotted to you when you're shooting 4K videos. So you don't get your 720p, which is already a smaller resolution. So you don't get that further compressed as much. You can upload it in 4K and then you get a more crispier image than you would have otherwise. So that's a little bonus tip for you. But guys, I do believe that's all I got for you. Let's talk about it in the comment section below. Questions, comments, concerns, threats. What do you guys think about shooting 720p in 2021? If you guys like this content, go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. You'll be glad you did. I do believe that's all I got for you. Peace.